Good Friday, Jesus crowned with thorns and mocked. While Jesus was being scourged, Pilate had several times addressed the multitude, and again had the shout gone up, "He shall be executed, even if we die for it." And when Jesus was led to the crowning, they cried again, "Away with him! Away!" New bands of Jews were constantly arriving, and as they came, they were instigated by the runners of the high priest to raise that cry. Now followed a short interval of rest. Pilate gave some orders to his soldiers. The high priests and council meanwhile, seated on elevated benches on either side of the street in front of Pilate's terrace, shaded by trees and awnings, ordered food and drink to be brought them by their servants. I saw Pilate again perplexed and doubting. Yielding to his superstition, he retired alone to burn incense before his gods and to busy himself in all kinds of divination. I saw the Blessed Virgin and her companions, when they had dried up Jesus' blood after the scourging, leaving the forum. I saw them with the bloody linens in a small house built in a wall in the neighborhood. I do not now recall to whom it belonged, nor do I remember having seen John at the scourging. The crowning and mocking of Jesus took place in the inner court of the guardhouse, which stood in the forum over the prisons. It was surrounded with pillars, and the entrance was open. There were about 50 low-lived wretches belonging to the army, jailers' servants, executioners, lads, slaves, and whipping servants, who took an active part in this maltreatment of Jesus. The mob at first crowded in eagerly, but was soon displaced by the 1,000 Roman soldiers who surrounded the building. They stood in rank and order, jeering and laughing, thereby giving to Jesus' tormentors new inducement to multiply his sufferings. Their jokes and laughter encouraged them as applause does the actor. There was a hole in the middle of the court, and to this they had rolled the base of an old column, which may once have stood there. On that base they placed a low, round stool with an upright at the back by which to raise it, and maliciously covered it with sharp stones and potsherds. Once more they tore Jesus' clothing from his wounded body, and threw over him instead an old red military cloak tattered and so short that it did not reach to the knees. Shreds of yellow tassels hung on it here and there. It was kept in a corner of the executioner's room and used to throw around criminals after their scourging, either to dry the blood or to turn them into derision. Now they dragged Jesus to the stool covered with stones and potsherds, and violently forced his wounded, naked body down upon them. Then they put upon him the crown of thorns. It was 2 hands high, thick, and skillfully plaited, with a projecting edge on top. They laid it like a binder round his brow and fastened it tightly in the back, thus forming it into a crown. It was skillfully woven from thorn branches 3 fingers thick, the thorns of which grew straight out. In plaiting the crown, as many of them as possible had been designedly pressed inward. There were 3 kinds of thorns, such as with us are called buckthorn, blackthorn, and hawthorn. The projecting edge on top was formed of one kind, which we call blackberry, and it was by this the torturer fastened it on and moved it in order to produce new sufferings. I have seen the spot whence the miscreants brought the thorns. Next they placed in Jesus' hand a thick reed with a tufted top. All this was done with mock solemnity, as if they were really crowning him king. Then they snatched the reed from his hand and with it struck the crown violently, until his eyes filled with blood. They bent the knee before him, stuck out their tongue at him, struck and spat in his face, and cried out, "Hail, King of the Jews!" With shouts of mocking laughter, they upset him along with the stool, in order to force him violently down upon it again. I am not able to repeat all the base inventions employed by those wretches to insult the poor Savior. Ah! His thirst was horrible, for he was consumed with the fever of his wounds, the laceration caused by the inhuman scourging. He quivered. This contemplation moved Sister Emmerich to such compassion that she begged to share her Saviour's thirst. She fell at once into a violent fever and endured so burning a thirst that next morning she was unable to speak. Her tongue blue, stiff, and parched was drawn back in the throat. Her lips were withered and stretched apart. The writer found her in this state the next morning, like one famishing for water, pale, unconscious, and apparently nigh unto death. After her attendants had with difficulty given her a little water, and after a long rest, She was able, though not without an effort, to relate the foregoing. The person watching by her reported that during the night Sister Emmerich frequently cried and moaned and writhed on her bed. The flesh on his sides was in many places torn even to the ribs. His tongue contracted convulsively. Only the sacred blood trickling down from his head laved, as it were in pity, his parched lips which hung languishingly open. Those horrible monsters, seeing this, turned his mouth into a receptacle for their own disgusting filth. Jesus underwent this maltreatment for about half an hour, during which time the cohort surrounding the praetorium in rank and order kept up an uninterrupted jeering and laughing.